Welcome back. Today we are going to be covering OPSEC, or what's also known as operational security. We are going to be going over quite a few privacy habits and privacy general knowledge. And then with the next video, which should be out either next week or the week after, we're going to start getting pretty technical. We're going to most likely be starting with Tor and then working our way in through different Linux distros that are focused on privacy technologies, things of that nature, encrypted email. But for this, we're going to, again, keep it kind of like last week. It's going to be a somewhat general overview because this is going to build on the things that I'm going to talk about coming up. So this is everything that we're going to be talking about today is right here. So let's go ahead and get started. So the thing that I'll mention with OPSEC is this is one of the most difficult things that people deal with when it comes to maintaining privacy, because there are so many ways that your privacy can be breached from just making a simple little mistake. One of the most relevant examples that I could point out of little mistakes that were made that got somebody caught would be Ross Ulbricht, who was known online as Dread Pirate Roberts. He was the founder of the Silk Road. For those that aren't aware of what the Silk Road was, it was a dark web marketplace where you could buy or sell just about anything, from my understanding. I never got to look at the site when it was around, but that was the general understanding that I have of the website. And what happened was the Silk Road drew a lot of attention from the feds, and they started an investigation trying to figure out who was running the website. The IRS was involved, the FBI was involved, I think the DEA at some point was, but they couldn't figure out who it was that was responsible, that basically started the website. And there was an IRS agent, and I may have some of the details wrong with this. There was an IRS agent who was browsing through forums, and they had snippets of Ross Ulbricht's usernames and interests, things of that nature. And an IRS agent eventually found a forum where Ross had published something it was under a real piece of identity. It was either a username that tied him to his real life, or it was an IP address. It was something to that effect. And that's how they ended up busting Ross. It was just a simple little mistake that he made in his OPSEC. So what I'm saying is, again, that this goes to just a simple little mistake can blow your cover. Now, I'm going to say this: if you have nation state actors coming after you, there's really not much you can do to hide from them. But we can cover some things here that can help you cover yourself from big government and big tech spying. So let's go ahead and start with our first example here, which is nation state actors. This includes anything like the FBI, Homeland Security, GCHQ, the NSA, CIA, the FSB. Any of these big name agencies that are heavily involved with intelligence collection. That is generally what I'm referring to when I say a nation state actor. It could also be any law enforcement agency. So let's look at this picture right here. This is a photo, or rather a couple of photos. I think this came out around the time of the Snowden leaks. The NSA has something called the Tailored Access Operations Group. And these were photos that were taken. So this is employees here. And what happened was you have these hardware manufacturers or network equipment manufacturers, Cisco being really one of the biggest and most recognizable. And what was happening in these cases is Cisco would send out hardware to clients. Could have been government clients or big corporate clients. And what happened was the NSA's Tailored Access Operations Group would intercept those trucks. They would open up this hardware and they would plant beacons, basically so that they could infiltrate the networks. And this saved them a lot of trouble trying to infiltrate the networks later, because if your hardware has been tampered with, nothing else matters. Because if you have, let's say, I'll give you another example, and this is why anti-cheats in games are such a problem, is because you're granting them ring zero access, meaning that they have access to kernel level access to your computer. So for example, the early version of the Genshin Impact anti-cheat had a system driver called MHYPROT2.SYS. And what happened was, because this was allowed by Microsoft, this was one of their I guess they call them signed drivers. And eventually Microsoft, after this whole fiasco happened, Microsoft released the vulnerable driver block list that's built into the newer versions of Windows, now into Windows Defender. But what happened was this Genshin Impact anti-cheat was being bundled with ransomware, and it didn't matter whether or not you had the game installed. Bad actors were able to use that to spread malware onto people's computers. I think it was ransomware specifically. So if your hardware gets compromised, or if your software is compromised at, let's say, ring 0, then it doesn't matter. You can have the best security practices ever, but your data is going to be leaked. So that's what these guys, what their target was, well, let's tamper with the hardware, let's seal it back up, let's ship it back out. No one will be the wiser, and now we have access into these networks. The thing that, let's start with this. The NSA, GCHQ, CIA, they're a lot more capable than most people think. We see stories, and it seems like they're more related to the FBI, at least speaking from the context of the US. I don't follow EU matters super closely. I don't know what their intel agencies over there are like. But when you hear stories about failures of security, it tends to be either, I would say, an agency just didn't care enough, or that they knew what was going on and they just didn't want to stop it, because these guys are much more capable than people think. They vacuum up a ton of data. If you want several examples of books that you could read that are pretty interesting, the first one is The Puzzle Palace. This was written to cover the older history of the CIA. So it covered from the 40s, around the time of World War II, right before the NSA existed. It talked about the Army Signal Corps and some of their successes and failures, and then eventually the formation of the NSA. Talked about a lot of their capabilities even back then in the 50s, the 60s, 70s, and it goes up until, I think, 1982, which was when the book was published, about how, for example, they used to have some sort of a deal worked out. There was a bunch of controversy with politicians and data collection, but for example, if you sent a telegram, they would know what the contents were. If you look on the cover of the book, there's those huge antennas, and these were set up strategically around the country and in different places around the world. And what would happen is those were basically farming radio waves to capture transmissions, decode them, and figure out what was being said. And keep in mind, this was 1940s to 1980s. Then you have Permanent Record. This book was written by Edward Snowden. This was kind of a memoir of his time at the NSA. This covered up until, I think the Snowden leaks were sometime in the early 2010s. He talked about X key score, which is what the NSA would use. For example, if they wanted to know what the contents of your emails were, if you had AOL or Hotmail or Gmail, or a Facebook account or Twitter, they could go on to X Keyscore and search for anything. And right after the Snowden leaks happened was when the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation or something like that, they released the web browser extension called HTTPS, because at that time, having an SSL certificate on websites, so basically the web traffic, if you logged into a website and it does not have HTTPS enabled, there's a high chance that a man-in-the-middle attack could happen, and they could see all of the things that you're looking at on the website. If you put in your email and password, they could see that. And that's why HTTPS really started taking off after the Snowden leaks. The EFF was really pushing with their extension, and now it's basically standard in web browsers these days is to look for HTTPS. And I think in some browsers now, it won't even load the website, or it will at least give you a warning if HTTPS is not working on the website. But I can tell you that whatever they had then in the early 2010s, it's gone way beyond that. These are, again, they're some of the most capable agencies. They have massive budgets. They can collect a lot of info and sift through all of this different stuff, especially now with LLMs. They can just pull transcripts of everything and have an LLM search for anything that they think they need to look into further. Another good book on this is Sandworm. This was written, I think, about 10 years ago, 5 to 10 years ago. This was about the WannaCry and the NotPetya ransomware that started, it infiltrated and basically took out a lot of the power infrastructure inside of Ukraine. It was when all the stuff's going on about 2014 or so, with all the stuff between Ukraine and Russia when all that first started. And then it also talked about how it took over other companies. I think there were a lot of hospitals that were affected. It was by one of those strains of ransomware where a lot of their computers were getting locked up. The Maersk shipping company was affected. It stopped shipments around the world while they were trying to fix their network and figure out where shipments were supposed to be going. One of the things that was covered in that book specifically was something called Eternal Blue, which was exploits for Windows that the NSA was using. Interesting book. This covers more of the FSB, but I think it did cover some of the NSA in there. But that's a good book. Another interesting thing to go research would be the Great Seal bug. This was something the Soviet Union gave this to an American diplomat in 1945. It was around the end of World War II. And it wasn't until, I think it was the early 50s. So this American diplomat had this hanging up in his office. It was basically a gift. He didn't know that it was bugged. And keep in mind, this was 1945. This bug had no power. This thing operated based on radio waves. It could record people's voice. It could record conversations based on radio waves going to it. There's a little more to it than that. I'm just keeping it simplified. But an advanced bug. And the way that it was caught was a British radio operator. I think there was an intelligence operator was listening to radio traffic one night and noticed that there what was basically a private conversation between Americans was going on, and it was going over clear airwaves, basically not encrypted. So that's an interesting story if you want to research that. Tempest is another interesting one. This is a technology that allows an intelligence agency, the NSA, the CIA, to look at the contents of a person's monitor. I think this affected LCD and CRT monitors. If you're a younger viewer on the channel, CRT were those old big blocky monitors that we used to use back in the 1990s and the 2000s. And it's an example of where air gapping would not protect you against that sort of attack. They would be able to see what's on your screen. Again, advanced technology. And another thing that you might be interested in researching is room 641A. This was a secret room that was set up in an AT&T communications office where I think it was just the NSA that had access to this room. And basically, they were monitoring all internet traffic and I think all phone traffic. It was a sealed off room that only the NSA was allowed into. Again, you could go research this. These are all interesting topics that will show you some of the capabilities that these agencies have. Where I'm going with this is it's best to take a realistic approach if you want to maintain your sanity. I know that this is super easy to become doomer about where, well, if I can't hide from these guys. They can see everything that I do. Yes, to an extent they can, not all the time. But just keep your sanity. If you go too far down this rabbit hole, you're going to find a lot of things that are going to bother you. You're going to get upset. Well, I can't protect against this. The way that I'd look at it is the eye of Sauron. If you do something that draws the attention of one of these agencies, there's nothing you can do to hide. You can run Tor, you can run Tails or Hunix. There's nothing that you can do that's going to be able to hide you from these guys. If you draw the eye of Sauron, you're pretty much done. The problem is, and if you go and search through some past histories of some of the things that these agencies have done, sometimes innocent people get targeted for no reason. I think it was when the government was experimenting with LSD. I could be wrong about this. I haven't read too much into it. Maybe one of the people watching this video would know more about this, where my understanding was that they would kidnap random Americans and experiment on them with different drugs to see what those effects were. Sometimes you draw the eye of Sauron without even trying to do it, and well, I mean, it's a problem. Unfortunately, I think this stuff has probably happened a lot in the past. Maybe it still currently happens, I don't know. But if you get too caught up into it, I think that it's just not going to be good for your sanity. And this is just something else I wanted to cover real quick. We'll get more into this when I talk about Tor, but this is a slide from a top secret slide deck. You can see up here, top secret, and it was shared amongst the Five Eyes agencies. This is one of 20. This is the last slide in the deck. There was 23 slides in total. It says Tor stinks, but it could be worse. Critical mass of targets using Tor, scaring them away from Tor might be counterproductive. We can increase our success rate and provide more client IPs for individual Tor users. We'll never get to 100%, but we don't need to provide true IPs for every target every time they use Tor. What this slide deck was talking about was one of the things that it covered was that the GCHQ was setting up a lot of Tor nodes. I believe also the German government has set up quite a few Tor nodes as well. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't use Tor. This is just something to be aware of, that intelligence agencies do have their hooks into this network. But what I'm talking about is these guys are, and when I get into Tor, I'll show you some examples, but these guys can de-anonymize Tor users in some cases. Not every case, but in some cases. So don't rely on something like Tor to try to keep you 100% anonymous. 100% anonymity just does not exist, unfortunately. There's just so many ways that things can leak. Next thing, let's get into this. Is just a picture of Ring security cameras. Let's get into security systems real quick. This does pertain to your personal security. Something before I get too far into this, just understand that there are drawbacks. If you're going to use a security system, you give up a lot of privacy in order to have one. I'm going to put an asterisk there that it does depend on the system that you use. But generally speaking, especially anything that you can monitor not locally. So if you want to be able to pull up on your phone, your cameras or sensors or anything like that, that's traffic that's going out over the internet. You have to assume that there's a chance that that could be compromised. If you set up something like a Ring system, it's well known that these guys share data with law enforcement. That's just something to be aware of. There are pros and cons to having a system like this. If you really want a security system, as long as you're aware of the privacy drawbacks, there are some benefits to it. The first one is an early warning system. So the reason that I think this is a good system for some people could benefit from this. Let's say you are someone with a higher risk, you have to protect yourself, and you need to know if you're about to be attacked in your home, for example. An alarm system can help you out. Let's say it's 2 a.m., you're in bed, and someone has decided to target you, and they go up and they kick your door open. Well, if you don't hear them, they can make it up by the time they get to your bedroom, things could be too late by that point. You no longer have an opportunity to defend yourself because they have snuck up to that point, and it's the element of surprise that's going to be a huge advantage for the attacker in that case. An early warning system is good to have, in my opinion. At the minimum, cameras are good. There are cameras out there that you can get that you could firewall and prevent them from phoning home. There are cameras that you can set up just on a local network, so you wouldn't be able to monitor them remotely, but you could monitor them around your house. Let's say someone is in the process of casing your home and they want to break in. Well, as soon as you see them start walking around your yard, you could look on your cameras and see, oh, someone's trying to get into my house. That gives you a few minutes to get prepared potentially. Again, that early warning system can be useful. Some of the different sensors can be multi-use. Some of the alarm systems have different sensors. So let's say carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. Those are always useful. I'm of the opinion that it's a good idea to have a smoke detector in every room in your house. And if you have gas hookups, for example, have the smoke detector / CO2 detectors in all your rooms in case, unfortunately, bad things have happened where people didn't have those and a tragedy happened, and that was that. The other thing that you can do is let's say you've got a basement, you've got a bunch of pipes running through there. You could get some water sensors. Let's say a pipe breaks for some reason or a washer develops a leak. And instead of leaving for the weekend and then coming home to $50,000 in flood damage, well, as soon as that leak happens and water hits that sensor, you can get that fixed right away instead of having catastrophic damages to your house. It's not just from a security aspect. These sensors can be useful for other means. And the last thing that I'll mention on this will not stop a determined attacker or a burglar. If someone really wants to get into your house to steal something, chances are a camera or a security system is not going to deter them. Now, an alarm could go off and they may decide, oh, well, I'm going to grab a couple things and then run out. But it could be the type of thing that having that alarm system means that they steal a couple things instead of looting your entire house. And it's just all of the other things combined with it that, generally speaking, for a lot of people, unless you're extremely concerned with privacy, you can get some good benefits from this. Something else I will also mention: if you're going to set up alarm monitoring, if you're going to have another company monitor your alarm system, so basically, let's say you are not home and something activates a sensor, the alarm company will try to get a hold of you. If they can't get a hold of you, they just send emergency services. You may have to get an alarm permit. Kind of depends on where you live. Some places have them, some places don't. Just make sure you check on that. You wouldn't want to have a sensor go off, and then if they show up and they don't have a permit on file for you, you could get a fine. It would be bad. Just something you want to avoid. If you are going to go this route, make sure you research base stations and keypads. Always keep your base stations hidden. You don't want these things out in plain sight. Some of them have smash protection and some don't. You don't want to get one that doesn't have smash protection. A burglar gets in and destroys it before the timer runs out, and it sends an alert to, let's say, the monitoring system. And then keypads, usually you want at least a couple of these where you can get to them before the timer runs up. Some of these have smash protection, some of these don't. Cameras, I'm going to say this is one of the most important parts of any system. The other thing you can do with cameras is you can also buy these separate from a dedicated alarm system. So you don't have to have the door windows, the door sensors and window sensors and all that other stuff. What you could do is take a look at companies. I think Reolink is an example of one that sells home cameras, and you could set those up around your house and monitor your place that way. There's plenty of different options that are out there. Actually, a couple of things to keep in mind. Ethernet is always better for reliability and security. I get into that down here. Attackers have figured out that because a lot of these systems do use Wi-Fi, an attacker could use a Wi-Fi jammer and they could potentially prevent these sensors from working properly. So that is something to be aware of. Ethernet's always the better choice. But there may be sometimes you just have to work with what you've got, which might just be Wi-Fi. It still is better than nothing if you decide you want to get one of these. The other thing is, if you're going to go with a cloud option, let's say you want to have cameras that they phone home, or there's a chance they could phone home, but you would just want to monitor them locally. That is where you'll need to learn about firewalls, network traffic. You'll want to find some kind of way to block those things from being able to phone home. If you can do that, that works even better. And if you're really concerned about where you're getting your hardware from, I'm not sure if this makes a whole lot of a difference for home users. Take a look at something called the NDAA list. It's the National Defense Authorization Act. I think this version in particular that relates to cameras was signed somewhere around 2021 or so, and it prohibits government facilities from using cameras from certain manufacturers, for example, Huawei or High-K Vision, that are suspected to phone home to the Chinese government. So if you're really concerned, you could check these. I don't think this is really that is much of an issue for home users, but again, it's just something you might want to look into. Make sure you're keeping up with maintenance. You'll have to change batteries. If you have sensors, make sure that you're testing your sensors probably about every month. You don't want to have a case where you have false alarms going off. If you have false alarms and it's getting called into your local emergency services, this is an example where you can get thousands of dollars of fines. You could potentially have criminal charges. Again, depends on the locality. Just be careful with this. Don't let your system, if you're having some kind of a problem with it, make sure you get it fixed. And as far as choices, I don't really want to give anything particular here, just because there's a lot of options that are out there. Some are good, some are not so good. Of course, you have things like Ring, Nest. There's probably 20 or 30 different security system choice these days. I would say do diligence on that one and just figure out which one it is that you think would work best for you. Okay, let's get into privacy habits. So this might sound like an obvious one. I know I hammered this one quite a bit during the previous video. I'm going to do it again here and talk about it from the privacy perspective. Two-factor authentication and using a password manager is an important part of a strategy. You don't want somebody to be able to access your account if you do not have 2FA and you have a weak password, because you just want, some people are still using the same weak password across all of their different online accounts. Well, that's a problem. Sooner or later, account's going to get taken over. And that presents a huge problem for your privacy because depending on the type of account, it could reveal your real information, your contact information. You don't want that. You have to keep your accounts secure. So even though it might not seem super obvious, these two are much more important for privacy than you might imagine. These seem like I think most people would assume these are security related, but these matter a lot for your privacy as well. Next thing, Tor and VPNs are becoming a more important part for daily device usage as long as you use a trustworthy VPN, which again, I know I mentioned in the last video, but I'm going to mention it again. The three choices that I recommend right now are Proton, IVPN, and Mullvad. You can pay with Mullvad and IVPN with Monero, and I think Proton is adding an option to purchase with Monero by the end of the year. I don't know if they'll get that done. We're getting close to the end of the year, but we'll see what happens there. Security questions, if you're still putting your real answers in there, security questions are complete garbage. This is one of those holdovers from old industry practices. I don't know why it's still used. It's kind of like how you'll get an email like let's say your bank, for example, sends an email saying, well, never click on links that are sent to you in emails. And yet then that same bank will send you an email a month later saying, oh, well, we're celebrating something, or we're adding this new feature. Click here to look at it. It's like, okay, so we're telling users to not do something, but then immediately right afterwards, we're encouraging that same stuff that shouldn't be done. And security questions are just an example of you can have a lot of things leak. So for example, those of you that spent any amount of time on Facebook, which is probably one of the worst platforms out there these days, this was a common thing back in the day anyway. I haven't used the platform in years. Maybe it still is, where you would see those quizzes get shared. Someone would post it, they would give the answers, and then they would repost saying, oh, what are your answers? And they try to have fun. Well, these are bad actors that have come up with these because they use these for security questions. It will ask questions like, oh, where did you, like, what was the first vehicle you ever had? Or where was your first date? Or what was the first time you ever went on vacation somewhere? And people will just give these answers out. And I don't understand why we are still having these problems, but bad actors farm these. A lot of them make these quizzes up in the first place so they can collect all that data and then use it to take over people's accounts. Again, just a bad practice. My recommendation would be, if you're forced to use security questions for your account, fake data is the way to go, in my opinion. Next thing that's important, browser privacy. I'm going to get more into this at a later video, but I'll just give a basic here. A few things you really want to look for when it comes to privacy is fingerprinting. So there's all sorts of fingerprinting. So browser fingerprinting can collect the type of operating system you use, what your monitors are, the fonts that you have installed on your computer, the type of graphics card that you have. It can collect all this different data. And similar to fingerprinting in real life, it can build out such a unique fingerprint of a person's system that it doesn't, even if you have a VPN, if you have a unique enough of a fingerprint, your identity can still be tied to, let's say you visit a website with a VPN. If you have a unique fingerprint, big tech will still know who you are. They will know your real identity based on that unique fingerprint. Again, this gets into the weeds quite a bit. We'll cover this on a later video, but this is something to be aware of. Next thing is malvertising. This is ads that so here's an example of malvertising. Malware is distributed via Google Ads at an alarming rate. There's been many examples of them, for example, OBS or Adobe Reader, where for some reason Google allowed these ads. They approved these. People downloaded these thinking that these were the legitimate pieces of software, and they got malware on their computers. This is just something that you have to be aware of. Malvertising is dangerous. Use ad blockers. uBlock Origin is by far the best. Data collection. This is telemetry. We're going to get into that here pretty soon. I've got a separate section on that. Tracking pixels. This is things like the Google Tag Manager or the Facebook tracking pixel. If you visit a website with the Facebook tracking pixel and you then go to a different website, now it can depend on how you have your browsers configured. There's some nuance to this. Generally speaking, the Facebook tracking pixel will track you across those different websites. It will pay attention to the things that you click on web pages, the things that you add to cart, the things that you buy. All that data goes back to Facebook. that goes as part of its ad data collection so they can better target ads. Even if you don't have a Facebook account, you can still be tracked by this because website owners are the ones who set up these tracking pixels, because then they will go to Facebook and then they will run ads to people. So even if you don't use Facebook, you can still be affected by that. Google Tag Manager is the Google equivalent of that. They collect a lot of analytics. Next thing, you've got to be more assertive. Scammers get one over on people who take the bait. I'll give you an example. I was listening to this guy one time. He got a phone call, and scammers will come up with these unique ways. This might not sound like a scammer right away, but what happened was they called and they said, "Hey, is this person available?" "No, I am this person." Well, now they have tied your name to your phone number. And then they say, "Well, do you know this person?" And in this one case, this person's like, "Yeah, I know them. They're a friend of mine." "Okay, well, I've got to get a hold of them to collect some debt," or it was something along those lines. This was quite a few years back. "Well, I'm not going to give you that information." And then they started arguing with the scammer, and the scammer started, "Oh, well, can I confirm some information with you?" This is how it always starts. They get what's these seemingly innocent pieces of data, they tie it to you, and they will absolutely use that against you at some point later on. Don't fall for these tricks. If you have a scammer calling you, and let's say by accident you pick it up, just disconnect. You don't need to engage with these people. Just hang up on them. Let me also give you another example here. So let's go over. So this is the reason I say you've got to be careful with account takeovers. This was a video. The title of it was "Malware on Large YouTube Channels." This was from Leo over at the PC Security channel. He was showcasing this YouTube channel called The Shook Kitty. And I just looked this up yesterday as I was finishing up this deck, this slide thing here, and I see YouTube has finally taken the channel down, but it was up for the better part of about a year, because by the time I had looked into this, I think the channel had been up for about a year. A bad actor taking the channel over, most likely it was through a cookie stealer malware. They took over the channel, and this person got locked out of their account, couldn't get it back. YouTube was absolutely no help. And by the way, I want you to keep in mind, at the time, I think this channel had 350,000 subscribers. If a verified YouTube channel with 350,000 subscribers cannot get their account back, basically, if you get any of your accounts taken over, you should just assume that you're going to lose them forever. This is why it's so important to be careful about, you don't want to end up with cookie stealer malware or anything like that on your computer. Well, anyway, what was happening, the scammer that took this over started uploading videos on this channel saying, "Oh, Fortnite skin swapper, free download 2024, and in the channel they would have links to, I think it was Mediafire, where people could download what they thought was going to unlock V-Bucks or whatever. Well, then they ran the executable, and a cookie stealer took over their computer, grabbed all their accounts information, they lost all their stuff. And these videos were getting thousands of views. I'm sure a lot of people downloading this stuff. The account takeover stuff is a pretty big problem. It's happening more and more to a lot of people because it's easier for scammers to either just socially engineer somebody into giving over their money, or to just trick them into downloading malware and getting a cookie stealer. It's easy if a person knows how to use psychology tricks against a person, like the cognitive biases that I covered a little bit in the last video, the Intro to Cybersecurity and Privacy in 2026 guide. Next thing, make sure you use unique aliases wherever you can and use proper hygiene. What I mean by this, and I'm going to get into this more in the Tor video, but for example, let's say you make a user account and you registered it and you use that account only through Tor. You do not want to ever log into that account through ClearNet, and vice versa. You would never want to log into a Gmail account through Tor. You don't want to tie your identity to, if we're talking about privacy, you don't want to tie your real identity. If you've been going through, like, let's say an online pseudonym, you want to make sure that you're not revealing your real IP somewhere, or that you give away to big tech that, oh yeah, I actually do for sure use Tor. It's one of those things that it's just good practice to have. This has got some people busted. I think it was a member of a hacking group, and I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but I think the arrest happened in Arizona. Maybe you could go look it up. I just think I'm thinking of this just now, but if I remember what happened, the FBI was after this person, and they were using either VPN or a Tor or Tor, not a Tor. They were using either a VPN or Tor to do all their hacking. And for some reason, they decided to log into an account through the ClearNet. Feds caught them, got arrested. If you go back about 5 to 7 years, you could probably find this story. Again, I think this happened to a hacker that was in Arizona. And also, so like I just mentioned, make sure you watch out for your login IP address. Again, if you're doing something, if you've only done something under a VPN IP address or a Tor IP address, you don't want to do that under your ClearNet, your real IP address. And the other thing with that is if you're going to use big tech services, let's say you want to use Gmail or Facebook or something like that, you probably wouldn't be able to create an account under Tor anyway. I've never tried it. I imagine it would probably block you from making the account. But if it did allow you to create it, it's kind of pointless because these services have moved so much towards detecting when someone's trying to hide their identity, where they are now doing a lot of identity verification. So just keep those things separated. And again, unique aliases. Don't use something that's easily tracked across the web if privacy matters to you. If you're going to use social media, just make sure you check your profiles, because a lot of times this stuff is made public or by default is made public. So like search indexing, I don't know if it applies to all social media platforms, but some of them will have this set to public by default, meaning that things like Google and Bing will by default show that profile in search results. You'll want to go through privacy settings if you're going to use these platforms and turn off all of this stuff as best as you can. Metadata, this is something I'll cover in a later video in more depth. What I mean when I say this, metadata can mean a lot of things. It can mean an email header that reveals personal or sensitive info. In this case, I'm referencing things like photos more specifically, where sometimes you take a photo with, let's say, a cell phone, and it will, in the metadata, it will include things like GPS coordinates. Well, if you go post that to a website and it doesn't automatically clear those off, I think Facebook started clearing this because it became such a privacy issue for them that was getting them a lot of heat. But some websites would allow you to post these photos, and if a person went and looked at the metadata, they could see your GPS coordinates of where you took the picture. They could see potentially the GPS is the big thing, but there's other stuff that could be in there. You'll just want to make sure if you're going to do this stuff, you're going to be uploading pictures you take with your phone, for example. If it doesn't have GPS coordinates, probably is fine to upload it. I would still say scrub it anyway, but you could get away without doing that. But there is one tool, and this one is multi-platform. There are some that are not multi-platform, but one you could look into is EXIF tool. And that would allow you to erase all the metadata in files before they get uploaded anywhere. Just something to be aware of. And then I've already mentioned don't lose your accounts, but if you suspect that you got malware on your computer, if let's say you download something sketchy, a command prompt window pops up and then goes away right away, probably a good idea to start changing, do what's called the nuke and pave on your operating system. Clear everything out, and then on a computer device you know is clean, start changing passwords and the order of importance on your accounts, because again, support from companies is generally non-existent. Now, let's get into telemetry. I'll try to keep this one mostly simple, but we've got an example that we'll look at. If you're not super familiar with telemetry, this is one of the easiest ways for sensitive info to get leaked. One of the things that you will see if, let's say you use Windows and you decide you want to start using Simple Wall. It's one of my favorite firewalls for Windows. It will start popping up things like, svc host.exe is trying to connect to the internet. Do you want to allow it? You can click allow or block. If you open up Control Panel, when you install Simple Wall for the first time, the moment you go to Control Panel in Windows 11, and I think this is Windows 10 as well, a pop-up will show up saying Control Panel. It's either Control Panel or System Settings.exe is attempting to connect to the internet. Now you might think, why in the hell does me going into the Control Panel trigger Windows trying to access the internet in Phone Home? The reason that is because telemetry is baked into a lot of this proprietary software in just about every way that you could think possible. So system settings.exe, if you go into Control Panel and you start changing privacy settings or you start uninstalling things, that is all data points that get sent back to Microsoft. This is all telemetry. Telemetry, I would say, used to have a good use case, which was collect errors. This is errors and bugs was really the big thing. If a program crashed, let's say, Telemetry in that case can be useful. But now it's turned into let's collect all of the sensitive data that we possibly can on a person's device and send all of that and phone all of that home. This is why now I think that it's important to block all this stuff. With Windows, you basically cannot block 100% of telemetry, even if you debloat it, even if you're using a good firewall. Some telemetry is still going to slip through. Same goes for Apple. I know there's a lot of hardcore Apple fans, and I do like Apple products, but if you look at the amount of data that Apple collects, it is a lot. Google is horrible. Google is basically an advertising company, which means they are hoovering up a ton of data. Where you typically have a lot less of it, where you're going to have much better options, generally, I say generally because outside of things like Ubuntu, I'm going to piss off the Ubuntu fans, but it's a big corpo distro. Not my personal favorite. I would say for privacy, there's better options that are out there, but generally speaking, if you're looking for operating systems, Linux and BSD are great. Graphene, if you're on mobile, similar options, Calyx or Lineage. These are going to be the best options to avoid as much of this garbage as you possibly can. Let's do a quick overview of how telemetry works. Just because if you've never seen this before, it'll make a little more sense. So this is you. This is the device that you're using or the app. So by device, this could be your operating system. App could be Firefox or a video game. If you try to open up Fallout 4 or Skyrim, for example, you will see that if you don't have a firewall installed, they phone home. And I think that's mostly because they have the Creation Club built into there now, because you can download mods and Creation Club content through the game now. But if you don't have a need for it, then just block it. Just because something asks for internet doesn't mean that it needs it. And then over here, you have your company servers. So in this case, let's just say Mozilla, because Mozilla has built-in telemetry into Firefox. So you interact with that app or operating system. That app then starts collecting usage stats, things that you click on, websites that you visit, apps that you open up, bugs, the extensions that you have, and specific extensions that you have installed. It's collecting a lot of different data points. This stuff is generally automatic. By that, I mean, generally you do not have the upfront option to just disable this. One of the rare examples of this not being right away is Fedora Linux. For those that have never used Fedora, it's a Linux distro. I think it was about 2 years ago, built in an option where after you installed it, it had an opt-out button in the setup page for telemetry. In my opinion, that should not be there, but that's just me. But hey, maybe I'll piss off some hardcore Fedora fans. We'll see. But generally speaking, this stuff is all done automatically. You have to go in later to opt out. In some cases, you do not even get to opt out. Once it collects all that data, it sends it over. Here's some things that you have to watch out for. So it'll track your behavior. It's got unique identifiers, so it can tie you to that data. I mean, they shouldn't do that. In some cases, they're not supposed to be able to. I think GDPR covers some instances of telemetry collection, but generally you're not asked for consent upfront. And again, in some cases, you don't have it. And then they will use that generally for marketing, sometimes for product improvement, sometimes nefarious purposes. The problem is once they've collected that data, they store it likely forever. They sell it to third parties. You get more spam callers. This stuff is a huge problem in closed source software. And anytime data gets breached, you have to deal with that. So again, keeping this simple, mitigation, disable telemetry and settings if you can, or just firewall it. If you're playing Skyrim, unless you have a need to go into the game to download Creation Club content, if you use a firewall, just block the internet access. Skyrim does not need internet access. It's not a multiplayer game unless you download the multiplayer mod. The other thing I'll mention with this is encrypted DNS and router firmware can help with this. So router firmware would be something like OpenSense or pfSense. They have ways so you could build in things like IP block lists, because this is how Microsoft, for example, phones a lot of data home through IPs. You could block those. Encrypted DNS has a lot of block lists built into it. And one of the things that you can block is things like ad networks, trackers, things of that sort. And let's go ahead and cover our final section for today. We are going to go ahead and start wrapping this up because we are already almost an hour in. If this seems like a lot to you so far and you are busy with your career, you are just trying to focus on doing your work, but you realize you have a need for more privacy and you want some help with this and you'd like all of this stuff taken care of for you and you don't want to have to spend hours upon hours of learning about this, look down in the description down below in the comment section. I will have a link to consulting. You can get a hold of me. We'll see if consulting would work for you. If it does, then I could come in and take care of all of this stuff for you so you don't have to worry about it. So you can spend your time doing stuff that matters more to you rather than getting lost in the weeds on this. But anyway, let's go ahead and cover our last section here, travel OPSEC. This is important if you're going to be doing any sort of travel outside of your country. There's a handful of things we got to cover here because these are pretty important. First thing, learn to blend in as best you can. Don't show off your power level. Outside of countries like Japan, because Japan tends to be a high trust, highly safe society, in most countries, it would be a bad idea to wear a flashy watch or designer clothes. You're just putting a target on yourself if you're doing that kind of stuff. That's what I'm saying by don't show off your power level. It's just not a good idea in general to be doing that kind of stuff. If you're going to be doing any kind of traveling, realize that plausible deniability only works to a certain extent. Now, I'm going to talk about plausible deniability from the perspective of United States law. I know it depends a little more depending on if you're in Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom. You could be put in jail if you try to deny knowledge of something. So let's jump down here to Ksenia Carolina. So in the case of her, she is an American citizen. This happened 2 or 3 years ago. She traveled to Russia. I think she used to be a Russian citizen or she has family over in Russia, but she was traveling there, but she is a US citizen. When she was going to enter the country, Russian customs made her unlock her phone so they could scan the contents of it. While they were doing that, they found out that she made a $51 donation to a Ukraine nonprofit that I think was going to help towards war efforts or something like that. She got put in prison for that. I think she spent about a year in prison. She finally just got released. I think it was maybe 6 months ago. That is an example of you have to be careful if you are going to travel. Be careful of the country you're traveling to and be careful of the things that you have on your devices because they will almost certainly be searched. Now, let me give you some examples of what I mean when I say this. Let's say you want to travel to a country like Russia or let's say Iran. It could be any number of countries out there. And in fact, I would say this could potentially apply to the UK. You go there and they ask you, they say, hey, we need you to unlock your devices before you can enter the country. If you say no, best case scenario, they're going to turn you around and send you out of the country and you're going to go back to your country of origin. Worst case scenario, they are going to assume that you are a spy of some kind and you will be imprisoned. Be careful with doing this. Just because, let's say, for example, in the United States, you can get away with using plausible deniability does not mean that it is that way everywhere else. Along that same line, if you're going to be, you have to learn local laws and customs. For example, the United Arab Emirates have made VPNs illegal. I think India has, I could be wrong about that. The UK is right now considering making VPNs illegal. So let's say you are a foreign citizen and you travel to a country where VPNs are illegal. Let's say you get allowed into the country. You log into a VPN from your computer. You're risking being sent to prison. So again, be careful of that. Know the laws of the country that you're traveling to. The next thing, because I see this discussed a lot, this is important, is these next 2 points here. Phone and computer encryption can be a double-edged sword because you don't want someone looking at your data that you don't want to have access to. But if you, again, depending on the country you travel to, this could be somewhere in the West or it could be somewhere in the East. Let's say you use Veracrypt, because this has been one of the things that Veracrypt is used for, is making hidden encrypted volumes. The thing you have to realize is that these customs agencies, these federal agencies, they are not in the Stone Ages anymore. They have progressed and they know all of this different stuff to look for now. This is not like it used to be 15, 20 years ago. If you go through customs and they see that, let's say you have a 500 gigabyte hard drive and 100 gigabytes is mysteriously occupied somehow, but they can't make sense of where all that data is being stored, well, they can make the safe assumption that, well, you have encrypted data hidden somewhere on your computer. Show us that data or we're going to put you in jail. Be careful with this stuff. The other thing is burner devices. So you might say, oh, well, let me just use a burner device. Again, this is something that customs have caught on to. So if you go across the border, if you go into another country, these agents know what to look for now. They can see, okay, well, I'm looking through this phone here. They've got 2 contacts saved in here. There's 10 messages total. This looks like a brand new phone. They're going to, oh, well, this is a burner device. Again, the best case scenario could be that you get sent back to your own country and you were denied entry. But again, worst case, you could be put in prison. The other thing, so if you're going to go the route of burner devices, at least try to make it look legitimate, like it actually is your daily driver device. But also realize that if it gets hooked up to anything, it's going to be permanently compromised. In the case of Ksenia Carolina, I don't think it was Celebrite, but it was probably something similar. Celebrite is typically used in a lot of Western countries. It's a device, the phone gets unlocked, you plug the phone into it, and it copies every single thing off of that phone. And in some cases, it can even use bugs or exploits to bypass device encryption to pull all of that data off. That's why it's important to keep your phones up to date. You've got to fix these bugs as they get released. So just something to be aware of. If you're doing any type of sensitive work, let's say you're an AI researcher or you are a system administrator for a large corporation and you travel to another country, you are going to be targeted by nation state actors. Could just be that they surveil you. Could be that they have cameras, hidden cameras set up in your motel room. Could be that they have someone following you around at all hours of the day. But just know that you will be targeted by them. They will know who you are. As soon as you get checked in through customs, they're going to know who you are. They're going to know if you have social media accounts out there, if you have any kind of data on a website that, let's say a company website, they will know this stuff and they will follow you. So just be aware of that. Assume that you are always going to be monitored, even if you think you are alone. This includes motel rooms. They will most likely be listening to you. I'll give you an example. I think this was talked about, I mentioned earlier in this video about the sandworm book. This happened into roughly 2010, 2013, somewhere in that time frame. There's a specific tool set that this younger guy, I think he was in his 20s, put together. It was for Windows. It was a list of exploits. If I remember correctly, he reached out to Windows or Microsoft, told them about it. They refused to fix it. And at some point, he traveled to Russia. It was to do some kind of a speech or conference or whatever there. And he got captured by the FSB because they were aware of who he was and that he had these exploits. And he was forced to hand these exploits over. If you go read the book Sandworm, you'll be able to learn more about the details. I can't remember all the details, but you'd be able to find out about this stuff. They knew who he was. They took him. And they made him hand over those exploits. Sometimes this stuff happens. Just be aware that if you're traveling to another country, that could happen. This one should be pretty obvious. Unfortunately, it seems like it has to be said because I'm still seeing examples of this pop up on Kick, in some cases on Twitch and YouTube. Don't antagonize the locals. It's really bad with these IRL streamers, but don't go there and be rude. For example, if you go to Japan, it's important to learn the customs and culture of the country ahead of time. In Japan, it is considered rude to walk and eat at the same time. It is considered rude to not cross at a crosswalk explicitly. Like even if you're on a street somewhere, I mean, maybe in some case you could get away with it, but generally it is a very rule-oriented, regimented society, and you do not want to do something that's going to antagonize and piss off the locals. It puts a target on your back. It's a bad idea. And this is also important. The laws of your country are not the laws of every other country. I see this is really bad with Americans, where they will travel to other countries. They will act like jackasses. They will upload these videos to the internet and say, oh, well, I'm an American. Yeah, well, American law doesn't apply in other countries. That doesn't give that person a right to go act like a jackass somewhere else just because they're an American. This has got a lot of people into trouble. So if you're going to travel to another country, again, learn the customs, cultures, and have a basic understanding of how their laws work there, because you do not want to get put in a foreign prison. It's a bad experience. If you want an example of how bad it can get, look up Vitaly ZD. He used to be I think a pretty popular YouTuber back in the 2010s. I think he's been in prison in the Philippines now for about a year because of his antics over there. And he's in pretty rough shape. I'll put it that way. On the topic of knowing that you're going to be targeted, if you think that I'm making any of this stuff up, it's easy to go verify that this stuff actually does happen. If it sounds far-fetched, the reason I bring it up is because it happens. Now, I know this is an older article. This stuff still happens. It happens with other countries' intelligence agencies. It happens here in America. This was an article that I read when it first came out, inside the NSA's secret efforts to hunt and hack system administrators. Across the world, people who work as system admins keep computer networks in order, and this has turned them into unwitting targets of the CIA or of the NSA for simply doing their jobs. Because if the NSA can compromise a system administrator and get access into their account, they can take over the entire network that way, and it makes their jobs easier. This kind of stuff happens all the time. Whether or not people think that it does happen, it does. So if you're let's wrap up the travel stuff. If you're gonna start doing any kind of travel, make sure you do prep. Most countries should have a State Department type of website where you can look at travel advisories. So let's say you live in France and you want to travel to Spain. You could go to this website and look and see, okay, what are the current relations between these countries that our countries have? Is there any risk that I could be thrown in prison because our countries aren't getting along with each other? Always check that kind of stuff. And then if you think you're going to potentially run into any troubles, it's a good idea to let someone that you trust know about it in case you go missing, no one hears from you, and they could start reaching out to try to potentially get some help sent your way. Here's an example. This has been happening a lot. And like passport bros have been running into a lot of trouble. American in Colombia was lured to his end on dating app. Prosecutors say his 4 suspects charged. I think this has happened to roughly 10 Americans this year just in Colombia. This type of stuff happens all over the world. And a lot of times this happens because people don't recognize the signs. They don't recognize they are talking to a scammer. They don't recognize that they are talking to somebody who is about to pull a knife on them. They're not aware of what's going on around them, and a lot of times they didn't learn ahead of time. Don't do this kind of stuff around the locals in these countries because it will make them mad. And in a lot of cases, it costs people. Best case scenario for people like this is they get mugged, their phones get stolen, their bank accounts get drained, but at least they walk away alive. But in a lot of cases, people are walking away, worst case scenario, or are not walking away is what I should say. Anyway, that is the basics of OPSEC and some privacy habits. The next video, we are going to start getting into the weeds. It's likely going to be either Tor or maybe Whonix. Well, I probably need to cover Tor first before I get into Whonix, but we're going to start getting much more technical in the following videos. If you liked it, or if there's something you would like to see added, just go ahead and leave it in the comments. I appreciate the support as always, and I will see you in the next one.